here's Brody Brazil.
I feel like this is a video I could have even made several weeks ago before the 49ers season was actually over. Some things were pretty clear before it was finished, but now that it's done, and now that we're several weeks removed from their final game, the dust has settled a little bit. I wanted to try and put together some really good thoughts about what we actually learned from this past season. If there's one word to describe it, maybe disastrous is most accurate. I'm trying to think of what even was the high point of the season for this group, this team, this fan base. It's hard to even figure out if and when that took place. So with that said, let's dive into 5 different thoughts here. Number 1, let's go back to the very beginnings of this season and some training camp hogwash. Yeah, I just wanted to use the word hogwash. All the hype, July into August, and it was kind of a foregone conclusion with pundits and those who surrounded this team that it was going to be a winning season. There was going to be playoffs, of course, right? You were in the Super Bowl last year. You lost it in overtime to a very good Chiefs team. Your group basically stayed together for the most part. You didn't have any significant losses. And the Christian McCaffrey injury was not supposed to be a big deal, right? Like, he'll be back for week 1 of the regular season. There were a lot of things that just spelled out maybe a potential trip back to the Super Bowl, maybe a rematch against Mahomes in Kansas City. But all of that, think about that perception versus the reality of what the season brought. And actually, when you go back to now 2 years ago for San Francisco and getting to the Super Bowl, you kind of forget how many things had to go right, even in that regular season. And they lost a couple games in a row early. They turned it around. They won both of their playoff games to get to the Super Bowl by 3-point margins. Razor-thin edges of even getting to the Super Bowl like they did, and obviously taking that game into overtime. There were like 4 or 5 things we all know that could have gone different in that game and had a different result of maybe winning the Super Bowl. But it took so many things to even go right 2 years ago that this now past season, you kind of forgot about how hard it actually was. Now, I'm not here to say that the players took all of this for granted, but when we think about teams and training camps and how we think things might go, and projections. And look, I understand everybody, when it comes time for training camp, they get excited about their team. There's optimism league-wide that everybody's going to be a little bit better or do something special in the upcoming season, even if you're a bad team, that you're going to improve. I think it's just a nice reminder for us that as you watch sports, to take all of that with a grain of salt, whether it's training camp of football, spring training of a baseball season. The bottom line is, it's a lot of talk. It's a lot of hogwash until it actually happens. The 49ers spent their whole season uphill. On the field, off the field, negative headlines and elements, they all compound, right? It wasn't just one thing. It felt like every week there was a new injury or a new setback. And at some point, like midway through the season, it felt impossible to overcome. And you start to look at the standings and you start to justify, well, the division is not good. And there's still a chance that if the Cardinals do this and the Rams do this, that somehow the 49ers can still be in a playoff position. Like, as a 500 team or less, should you really be talking about the playoffs? I mean, I realize that was logistically possible for a couple weeks, but at some point when the whole season is uphill, you have to kind of understand this is not going to go your way, and it's going to take a miracle to turn things around. Now, some of this was controllable. I'm talking about performance on the field and turnovers and lack of conversions on third downs and red zone offense and special teams. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that was controllable from a football sense that didn't go their way, but there was also some things that were totally out of control that didn't go their way. Injuries on the field. McCaffrey's first injury, his second injury. How about Devondre Campbell late in the season quitting in one of the final games? How about Debo and Pepper, that little squabble in Tampa after Moody missed, I think it was his 3rd field goal missed of that game against the Bucs? And not to mention, Ricky Pearsall, right before the start of the season, was shot in Union Square, and 2 49er players lost children during this season. Now, that's all the uncontrollable stuff. Right, so there's just a line here of controllable things versus uncontrollable. The point is, all of that takes its toll. And at some point, if you think, well, they're good enough to turn things around, there is a human element at play here that if you spend the whole season uphill, it's hard to ever gain any momentum. And I talked about Jake Moody, and I think as much as football is about your quarterback and about your star running back and your receivers and your linebackers and all those key positions, I mean, kickers still do matter. Jake Moody missed only one field goal before that ankle injury when he tried to make a tackle. He missed 9 field goals following the ankle injury in the subsequent 9 games. Now, 3 of them came in one game against Tampa. And you know what? A lot of these missed kicks were from high 40s and low 50 yards out, so they weren't exactly the gimmies. But the point is here that kickers matter to your season, and the 49ers couldn't stay competitive in a lot of games, couldn't win close games, because if you can't secure yourself 3 points and field position doesn't matter and you're not going to nail that field goal once or twice or, 3 times in a football game, we're talking 3, 6, 9, 12 points a game that are different because your kicker is not where they're supposed to be. Now, I'm not here to blame the entire season on Jake Moody, but it is a takeaway as much as all these other key positions matter. You got to have somebody who's going to get you your 3 points when they're supposed to. Okay, we haven't even talked about Brock Purdy yet. We're 4 topics in, and we're finally getting to one of the biggest headlines of the season. The question of his next contract, and really the value of his next contract, it just loomed all season long. And every performance by Purdy was almost like, well, how did he do in the game? How did the team do in the game? But, what does this mean for Brock Purdy's future? What kind of deal is he going to get now because of this? And when Dak signed his contract, that was a nice comp, I suppose, a mile marker of maybe what to expect for Brock Purdy. But you knew that none of this was likely to get settled or squared away during the season. So what are we even talking about that all the time for? Why worry? I mean, the 49ers kind of made pretty clear that they were committing to him at some point. So now we're just worried about a money and a dollar amount. It doesn't really matter during the season. And I get it. People are interested. And they also looked at Brock's performance. I mean, there were some probably bad weather games that you look at and say that's not one of his best attributes or assets. Unless it's sunny or indoors or normal weather, Brock Purdy may be up against literally the elements. And so you're trying to, though, create that in terms of his value or what's not his value in that next contract. Again, it feels like the commitment has already happened. We're only talking about how much it's going to be worth, but all of this was evaluated all season long. Do I think it was a distraction for Brock Purdy? Probably not. Do I think somewhere deep down it was in his head about, I got to do well this year. This is my contract year. This is where I'll get paid. Of course. But I feel like in terms of attention given to this topic, like it is a thing, but it shouldn't be one of the main things all season long. And I think it's just a takeaway from the year. It's not something we can go back and change now. It's just a takeaway of the entire year. Last thing here that we've learned from the past season is kind of looking ahead that 2025 is not really a do-over type situation. The defensive coordinator, Nick Sorensen, and the special teams coordinator, Brian Schneider, they've both been relieved from their duties, and obviously those 2 areas were team struggle points, and so some of that makes sense. But the coaching staff itself is going to look different. 33 free agents on this team, including Hargrave, Greenlaw, Ward, and Hufanga. The team inherently, as most teams do year to year, is going to look different. And all of this following a season last year where they went after Trent Williams and Brandon Ayuk, and they signed them to contract extensions. One was holding out, one was holding in. They kind of went all in last year. Can they really afford to go all in? Do they really want to double down on that in this upcoming year? I mentioned Christian McCaffrey before. Again, another injury. It was the Achilles, now it's a knee. He's got to make that recovery. You don't know what even to expect from the player who was the cover player on Madden last year and was the number 1 overall draft pick in most fantasy drafts across the country. Brandon Ayuk. He, after signing the big contract, is recovering from an ACL, MCL, and meniscus injury all at once. You don't know when, how, or where he's going to return and emerge and what that's going to look like. And yes, you have secured an 11th overall draft pick, but you know what? It would have been better if the 49ers season entirely tanked and they got a 5th overall pick instead of 11th. They're kind of middle of the pack almost after having a really rough season. So the point is, the road ahead, it's not a do-over, and it doesn't necessarily get a lot easier. Those are the 5 things I think I learned from this 49ers season. Let me know what you learned in the comments section down below. And since you made it here to the end of this video, thumbs up. That greatly helps me, this video, and this channel. And one more thing, don't forget to go down there and subscribe. That way I can definitely see you back here next time.